Okay, today we're going to be looking at the chapters of Lopez assigned for East Asian religions. And the first of these is chapter 18, Lao Tzu, ancient philosopher, master of immortality and God. And I want to look at that for a moment with you. Okay, that begins on page 292, or excuse me, 330. And as we mentioned before, there are a number of different founders in religions of East Asia and of China. Gautama Buddha, of course, founds Buddhism. Master Gung, or Confucius, founds, guess what, Confucianism. And Lao Tzu is considered the founder of Taoism. And this chapter here, it begins by giving you a basic introduction to the section it's going to show you. And this section is from a biography of Lao Tzu written by Gao Deng. And one of the things that's going on here is that this is being written when a number of people are considering that Lao Tzu is semi-divine. And they're talking more about miracles associated with him. Now, Gao Deng wants to give a little bit less fantastic fantastic view of Lao Tzu. And so he will comment on the legends that have grown up about Lao Tzu, but then he will talk about how that they really are not part of who Lao Tzu truly is. For example, on page 335, the first major paragraph, some say that Lao Tzu has existed since before heaven and earth. Others say that he is the essential soul of heaven, a spiritual and wonderful being. Then again, some claim that his mother remained pregnant for 72 years and only then gave birth. At birth, he split open his mother's left armpit and emerged. Being just born, he already had white hair. And then he talks about some other records and other legends about Lao Tzu. Toward the bottom of that page, the first sentence, all these are statements found in miscellaneous records, but not in the authentic scriptures of divine immortals. Thus, they cannot be considered reliable. I, Geong, state, for my part, I think that if Lao Tzu was a spiritual being of celestial origin, he should indeed have appeared in each successive generation, exchanging his humble rank for a humble condition. He should indeed have turned his back on the pure serenity of the heavenly spheres in order to immerse himself in the foulness and defilements of the world. And as you work through the chapter, you'll see that Gao Deng wants to cut it back in terms of the fantastic and miraculous stories of Lao Tzu and get back to a little bit more human level understanding of who Lao Tzu is. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction to chapter 18, Lao Tzu, ancient philosopher, master of immortality, and God. The second chapter is chapter 21, and chapters 18 and 21 will be covered by those of you whose last names begin A through L, I believe. And so this next chapter also is for you. Chapter 21, Body Gods and Inner Visions. Okay, again, we're still working with Taoism, but here we're going to a scripture that's more involved with religious Taoism. And you'll notice, if you remember, that we talked about religious Taoism, that it arises about 500 years after the life of Lao Tzu. And it can be traced to one particular person, and we mentioned that before. And the religious branch of Taoism, or the religious school of Taoism, one of its major goals is to transform you into an immortal, into one who will never die. And as we mentioned before, the way that is said to do this is by alchemy. And by alchemy, they mean transformation. There's the outer transformation that comes from ingesting certain substances, but also there's the inner transformation. And also, part and parcel of this is that all the parts of your body have a corresponding feature in the heavenly realms. And by meditating on that link between, say, your liver and the moon, you are going to be able to cultivate a spiritual and eternal body. So that's what this scripture is all about, the scripture of the Yellow Court. And it was written by a medieval Taoist. It gives you a number of passages from that scripture, from the first stanza through about the fourth stanza. And each of the stanzas begin with the stanza itself, and then there's a paraphrase that re-explains what the stanza is about. So first you read the stanza, get the images in your mind, and then in the paraphrase you find out what those images are meant to mean and how they are to link your body with the eternal. Okay, so that's chapter 21. Now we're moving on to the passages that will be covered by those of you whose last names begin M through Z. And first of all, we'll go to chapter 26, Shrines to Local Former Worthies. Okay, and chapter 26 begins on page 405. And this is a Confucian text. So you remember in Confucianism, it's all about order, it's all about being worthy, becoming a good person, partly by placing yourself in the hierarchy of government. And so a lot of what's going on here has to do, to some extent, with politics. And the first part of it talks about the intrigue between a couple of different people and how one person has been demoted and then his friend gets to give a speech and gives a speech criticizing the person who demoted his friend. The second part of it, however, is what I want you to concentrate on. And this begins on 4:15 and goes through about 4:16. It's entitled, Former Worthies Ought Not to Be Mixed with Weird Spirits and Cruel Ghosts. And what's going on here is that a relatively high-ranking official is touring a rural area, and he comes across various shrines to the deities and to the ancestors. And what he's doing is criticizing them and saying they're completely unworthy, they're completely wrong, they just have no sense of decency, whatever. And what I want you to do here is to think about the difference between an urban government official and his understanding what is worthy, and the understanding of a farmer who has worshipped at this shrine for generations and has put up a picture, say, of one of his ancestors, and also laid flowers at it or laid whatever he could in honor of that person. So keep in mind those two perspectives, the governmental high official urban elite and the common person who have built these shrines. Okay, so that's Confucian politics. Also, the next chapter we're going to look at is chapter 38, Kaibara Ekin's Precepts on the Family. And that begins on page 613. Now again, we're still in the realm of Confucianism, but here we're actually in the realm of, let's see, where are we? Yes. This is Japanese Confucianism. So this is a Japanese text that comes, or rather a Confucian text that comes from Japan and is written by Kaibara Ekin, who lived from 1630 to 1714. Now, as we mentioned, Confucianism is all about your place in society. It's all about following rules. It's all about being polite and honoring every person as they are to be honored. And also it's about order and the proper way to do things. And so this particular text is going to talk about those things. On 614 in the introduction, I want to mention, it talks about the creative principles of filiality and humaneness. And those two words, filiality and humaneness, are at the core of Confucian teaching. Remember, we mentioned before that one of the main virtues in Confucianism is filial piety, and that is the respect that a child gives to their parents. And then that concept is expanded to all relationships. You honor those who have gone before you. You honor those who have prepared the way. You respect them. You honor them. You obey them. You care for them. So the creative principle of filiality relates to filial piety, which is one of the major virtues in Confucianism. Humaneness, that comes from a particular word, ren, in Confucian texts, and it's been translated in a number of different ways. It basically means a good and proper person, but it has been translated as the noble person. It has been translated as the gentleman. It has been translated here as a humane person. And that term includes within it all of the virtues that a person should cultivate in terms of their dealing with other people and being kind and not cruel. So it talks about those two things, filial piety and humaneness. But the text itself begins on 619. And one of the things I want you to look at in this chapter is that it is divided into various parts. Chapter 1 begins regulating the family by disciplining oneself. And that again is still at the core of Confucianism. You create order in the world first by creating order in your soul, then by establishing order in your family, then by establishing order in your village, and so on and so forth. So it's always the first person you need to train, the first person you need to discipline, the first person you need to cultivate is yourself and your humaneness. And then it will go on to talk about other important Confucian virtues and ideas. And I want you to look at some of those and compare and contrast them with what are, you would say, common values in contemporary American culture. What do we do in raising our children, and how is it different from what Kaibara Ekin talks about? How do we treat our parents and grandparents, and how does it compare and contrast what Kaibara Ekin is talking about? Okay, so those are the things I want you to be looking at in those particular chapters. And so that's all I have to say in terms of the introduction. Are there any questions at this point that I can address? Okay, hearing none, I will stop the recording.